Hello and welcome to ATP Report. I'm Barry Nussbaum. We have the terrific Clare Lopez back today. As you know, Clare is a regular contributor to ATP Report. She is the former State Department expert, former CIA expert, and she's still an expert, but now she's with ATP. Welcome back, Clare.
Thank you, Barry. Always great to be with you.
Let's start off with the tragedy out of Japan. Shinzo Abe, the former prime minister, was assassinated the other day while speaking on behalf of the Liberal Democrat Party. He was at a parliamentary campaign event in the western Japanese city of Nara. His killer fired 2 shots at Abe from a homemade double-barreled gun and was quickly taken into custody by Japanese police. He's being mourned around the world as a great friend of many countries, especially and notably the United States, Israel, and Taiwan, among others. Clare, you have a rather unique theory that this assassination that shocked the Japanese people greatly, I mean, the mourning is all over the country, may be, as you call it, preparation of the battlefield, like, as you called it in your article, Ahmad Massoud was killed days before 9/11, and it had a tragic consequence in the Afghan fight for many years. This is happening while China is making the most dramatic threats, well, in decades against their neighbors and the United States. What do you think is really going on?
Well, you know, the investigation into the assassination of former Prime Minister Abe goes on. It's not concluded yet, but it did strike me when that terrible tragedy happened at the end of last week, the killing of Abe, that there were parallels, or at least potential parallels, with what happened before 9/11. And the point is taking a key rallying leadership figure off the scene at a time when perhaps he would have been most needed.
So do you think it's going to change Japanese policy vis-a-vis China, for example?
Well, unfortunately, no, because if this indeed was the work of the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, it was to take out in Abe the leader who was most capable and willing to rally the Japanese political leadership and regional allies to confront China and to defend Taiwan.
Yeah, you know, on Taiwan, Abe was very clear regarding Taiwan that there was a responsibility by neighboring countries like Japan and the United States to defend and protect sovereignty of Taiwan. Wow.
Yes, well, Shinzo Abe, for one, saw very clearly that given the geography of East Asia, if you can picture that with the Japanese islands, you know, curving around southward, and Taiwan lying to the south of Japanese most southern islands, and Abe spoke openly that an attack on Taiwan was a national security threat for Japan itself.
And he was right. And this is a hole in Japanese political history that it's going to be very interesting which way the Japanese go, because as you said, Abe was a very strong protector of not only Japanese interests, but American interests in the Middle East, the Near East. And on the other side was a good friend of Israel, and he's being very greatly mourned there as well. The government of Sri Lanka, what a tragedy there. I'm laughing because of what I'm going to mention in a minute. The government's collapsed. Its leaders have fled. The parliament is going to elect a new president probably in a week. And protesters stormed the residences of the current president and prime minister. There are wild pictures on the internet of these protesters swimming in the pool in the mansion and playing in his bed. President, I guess you say it, Rajapaksa, had been ruthless in his crushing of the Tamil Tiger insurgency some years ago when he was defense secretary. He's leaving. His brothers who are in government are leaving. This is the biggest, well, tragedy in political history since the country went independent from Britain in 1948. What do you think is next for for the region and for specifically Sri Lanka?
Well, unfortunately, I think the collapse of the Sri Lankan government due, yes, to corruption, to mismanagement, but also to financial pressures. And in there, I think perhaps it may be a harbinger of things to come for other countries likewise pressured with coming food shortages, financial crunch. The president of Sri Lanka apparently is adrift on a boat right now somewhere in the Indian Ocean.
Wow. And I found it curious that it's like his whole family had incredible power. He doled out ministerial positions and security positions to brothers and cousins and so on. I think the people had just had enough.
Yeah, that is part of it. But I also think that rising costs of living, in particular food, and the way that struck Sri Lanka, it's already hitting Iran, and it will hit other places, especially across North Africa.
That's an interesting theory, and we're going to bring you back in the future to talk specifically on that. You've always mentioned that this is not an isolated situation. Shortages of supplies, especially critical supplies, that keep the countries running and the people fed. So what you have proposed is the future. Seems to be happening now, Claire. Yeah.
It is already happening, and a large amount of that is due to the inability of Ukraine to export its grain crops, in particular wheat, also barley and soybeans, because its ports to the south along the Black Sea are blockaded by Russian forces. There are talks underway to establish some kind of a corridor, maybe to get that grain out to the countries of the world that depend on it so much. But food shortages are coming, nevertheless.
Wow, it's a dark future, and sadly, I think you're right. And you did call it some months ago when we started these conversations about the ramifications of Ukraine being shut off from the rest of the world. I hope it's not as bleak as it seems to be playing out in the beginning. Speaking about bleak, Iran is zooming along with massive increases in uranium enrichment, and it's not a secret. They're bragging about it now. They've kicked out the inspectors. They've turned off the cameras. And anyone that'll listen hears an earful about how they are going 100 miles an hour towards uranium enrichment for peaceful purposes. Nobody believes them at this point. So their economy's in free fall. 80% of their 80 or 85 million people, whatever, are living below the poverty line. What happens next in this country? Their ships and their proxy terror groups around the world are ramping up offensive behavior towards the United States ships, as an example, and obviously towards Israel through their proxy army Hezbollah to the north of Israel's immediate border. What's next for Iran?
Well, we know that Iran has been driving for a deliverable nuclear weapon through its clandestine nuclear weapons program for many decades. That was not even touched upon in the July 2015 nuclear corridor, JCPOA. But during the Trump presidency years, there was a policy of maximum pressure, which really kept Iran from driving as full speed, or at least as brazenly, openly as they are now. But just as you say, Barry, now under the Biden administration, which is begging to get back into the nuclear deal, Iran thinks that all constraints are off. We don't know what will come next financially, economically. Yes, they're in trouble, but the money that they do have, oil exports, violating sanctions, going to the nuclear weapons program and terror support.
Yeah, Biden made a comment in Israel about how he stands with Israel forever, and he's a Zionist, and his communications to Saudi Arabia, undying friendship, blah, blah, blah. All those countries, the moderates in the Sunni world, plus Israel, are leaning heavily on Biden to step up and be more Trump-like in regards to Iran. But I don't see it, Claire. Like you said, he'll do anything to continue the Obama legacy of this JCPOA, which failed miserably and doesn't even exist anymore.
True. But I do give some measure of credit to the Biden administration for turning, as I see it, to a little bit more of a practical policy. He arrived today in Israel. Next stop is the headquarters of Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen in Ramallah. After that, I think, comes Saudi Arabia. And there we see the practicality coming out, I think, which is we need Saudi oil. They don't have much more to pump, by the way. But also the way the things are shaping up in the Middle East with the Abraham Accords and the unification of these Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and so forth, with Israel, thanks to the Trump administration and the Abraham Accords. I think finally the Biden administration sees that that is a train that's already left the track, and maybe it's in our, as well as their, best interest that we patch things up, which I think is what's going to happen in Jeddah. I believe they're meeting in Jeddah.
Well, we'll see. There's so many mixed signals flying. I don't know which story to believe. There's probably a dozen of them, and they're coming from everywhere. When we talked about farming, a lot of people skip the United States, and that's a mistake. We are, the United States, heavily dependent on Ukrainian and Russian fertilizer, similar percentages for pesticides and ingredients that go into pesticides, meaning that our farmers may not have enough for what they need to not only produce food for us, but for export. So the rest of the world may be out of inventory coming from us. We'll probably have enough for our own consumption, but not the rest of the world. The rest of the world may become desperate because of it. And meanwhile, there's a bizarre story that's been circulating. Bill Gates is now the largest owner of farmland, not only in America, but the world. What is going on behind the scenes that doesn't make it into the press about Bill Gates and farming?
Well, I think Bill Gates, like others, knows that food security is going to be incredibly important in years to come, months to come, let's say. Over the 4th of July holiday, I was at a family reunion on a farm in central Ohio where I asked about some of these very questions. And what I was told is that seeds and fertilizer and pesticides have been available for these farmers anyway this year, but at hugely increased prices, like 400% increase in prices for fertilizer, pesticides, but also the diesel fuel to power all of their equipment.
You know, when you talk like that, it strikes me as bizarre that the Biden administration blames rising prices on production gouging, you know, in the oil business, the food business, the trucking business, the distribution business, when in reality, everything from the bottom up that goes into, for example, putting cereal on your table or beef or chicken or whatever, those prices are being passed along because, as you said with your family, yeah, the supplies are still there, Claire, but the prices for everything that go into the final product are going through the roof.
Yeah, absolutely true. And what that means is that probably the United States will be able to continue meeting domestic food needs at way higher prices. We just saw new inflation numbers come out this morning at 9.1% year on year from last year. But we're not going to be in a position to help anybody else in the world when real famine and hunger strike the less advantaged countries. We've talked about Africa, but even Europe. And the reason goes right back to what you just said, Barry, and that is we have the ability to produce enough energy for us to be energy independent and to export as well, and we're not doing it.
Well said. I'm nervous about the future simply because so many hundreds of millions depend on us. And at a certain point, the prices are just going to be unaffordable. Claire, tell people where they can keep up with you and follow you like we do at ATP.
Well, certainly, please follow me at ATP, American Truth Project, where all of my videos with Barry are posted. And also, I post articles and my interviews at Citizens Commission on National Security, the United West, and also with Brandon Howes at Worldview Weekend. And I am also at Sarja Sangari's Near East Center for Strategic Engagement and on social media. I'm at Clare M. Lopez on Twitter, my name the same, at Facebook, at Clarecho, CLARECHO on Telegram. I'm sorry, on Telegram, it's at Lopez Liberty. Clarecho at Clarecho is on Truth Social.
You must be doing videos 26 hours a day. I don't know how you do it. I would advise all of our people out in ATP land, follow her somewhere. You'll be smarter and you'll be more informed. And I can tell you from ATP's perspective, we do the same. Thanks for joining us today on ATP Report. And thanks to Clare Lopez, obviously. I'm Barry Nussbaum.